Welcome, Nick Groves here with Drift Outfitters, ambassador with Renzetti and RD. Today we're going to be doing my version of the Kreelex Minnow, converted to a Steelhead Swung version. I know many of us all know the Kreelex Minnow very well in different environments for bass, trout, and basically anything that swims in rivers and lakes. I sort of came up with this with that sort of intention in mind, to follow the same, profile and platform of the Kreelex, but converting it to a swung platform and adding a little bit of loop, throwing some ostrich in there basically, just to help elicit and create some movement in the water. This fly hunts. It can be used. There's a multitude of different colors and tones that you can use. Creates a really nice subtle profile in the river when it's swung. And it does dig quite well, so you can get away with fishing this on very light floating tackle, or you can dig deep if you have to. So it's a very versatile fly. It's kind of a bit of a unique situation converting this into a swung fly, but in the right fishing conditions it can knock them out of the park. Okay, let's get tying. So to start with the Kreelex swung fly, I'm going to be using a Aquafly's 27 mil return eye shank. The reason I do that is because the Kreelex Minnow does have a rather built up tapered head, thread head, and that's what we're going to follow here. So I'm going to go ahead and tie this in and start by lightly lashing in the return eye. I'm going to come all the way to the back of the shank, right to the edge of the jaws, and then I'll come up and lay a good solid thread base over top. I'll leave a little bit of space just to not start overcrowding the eye there, and come back to the back, and then I'll come up and set my bead chain in. In this case, I'm going to use a small bead chain eye, just 2 eyes here. I will lay it in on top, sort of right at the end of where that return shank comes back on itself, leaving again some space up front so that we can accommodate the materials. So I'll flip that over to the bottom. I tie it in on top and then flip it over. It helps to sort of tighten it and set it where I want it. And I'll secure that in. Next step is I'm using an Aquatalon number 4, same hook that I use on most of my swung flies regardless of the size, and combined with a trailer wire, which is a 60-pound braid. So I pre-rigged this hook. You can either assemble it on the river or change it out. I find getting them ready here reduces some unwanted time on the river spent trying to get that hook through. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay this on top with the 2 pieces of braid flat. I'm going to pinch that down lightly, give it 2 turns. This is my opportunity to adjust. So I can pull that back or forward depending on where I want that back hook to be. If you are intending on changing this out, you do want to make sure that you've got enough of a loop in behind to pull that hook through. I'll go ahead and cinch that down, and I'll hold it right over top as I wrap right back to the end of the vise. And there, that is basically set. Again, we're totally vertical. That hook's going to run the way I want it and help true the fly. I'll then come back up, and just for some added security here, I will bring that back around on each side of the bead chain and then lash that back on itself, trim this off with my braid scissors, and give that some wraps. What I'll do now is just start to build a little bit of a taper here in front of the eyes, just to help create the head at the end. So now the back hook here, you could wrap some flash or some braid back there. It's not really needed. Most of the action, most of the materials are actually in the front half of the shank. Not a lot of stuff going on back there. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to add in on either side. We're going to add in some of the Easter basket mylar. Again, this is stuff that I've been using on a lot of my steelhead flies. Sort of came across it with a lot of Kevin Feenstra over in Michigan. His stuff, he's using a lot of this flash. It's very stout, very wide in diameter, but it does create a very nice sort of lateral line and a significant amount of flash when you want it. Fish seem to love it. So I'll cut just a taper on one end, and I'll tie that in on one side. Just making sure that where I attach this, it's not gonna, I don't want it to extend past the hook point. So it can come back just about to the hook point there, and that'll be plenty. So I will give that a few turns on the one side. I'll make sure that it's lined up horizontally along the shank, and then I'll trim that off, come around to the other side, and repeat. Just make sure that the length on both is equal, roughly equal, and then I'll lash that in on my side. Some looser turns, trim that off, and just make any final adjustments you want there. Okay, I'm happy with that. And then I'll secure that back to the halfway point. Okay, the next step is we're going to put our tail end of Kreelex or polar fiber flash. Usually we'll be using, two tones similar to the Kreelex minnow, where you've got the lighter color on the bottom, the darker color on top, sort of insinuating a bait fish. So I will start on the bottom, and what I'll do just to maximize the amount of material I'm using, I want equal parts on the top and bottom for the tail. A little goes a long way with this, so I'm going to take an amount about like that. Hard to explain, but maybe the diameter of a bodkin when you press it down. I could count the fibers, but we'd be here well over Chris's allotted time. So I will take that and trim it. What I'll do then, just because I don't want to waste half of this, I'll take it and cut it in half and then line it up. So I'm going to cut that in half and line it up. And one of the keys, I think, with the Kreelex minnow is that we're tying it with very abrupt cuts on the front and back, which I think does create an interesting sort of profile in the water as well. So I've got those tips completely lined up and even. That's one of the keys here. This is going to be the bottom, the silver color. So I'm going to go ahead and line that up. And again, I want it to come back just past the hook point for the tail. And that's going to create the taper that I'm looking for in the length of fly. If your vise is in the way, obviously it'll lay down once you complete the fly and take it out. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that's the length I want, and I'll pinch that down right on the bottom. A couple turns. I'll trim the excess off, and then I'll come over to the top. And I'll take, this is a mottled gold. There's a lot of different colors of this stuff, so anything will work. It's very nice because it provides a bit of a mottled flash appearance in the water. It's not extremely extreme. So again, we'll take this, we'll cut the pieces that I've got in half just to maximize the material and not waste any. And we'll line that up and trim the tips off nice and even. And you can always do some additional trimming after as needed, but it's nice to have it. And so what I'll do here is I'll just make sure that everything's lining up from top to bottom. So I'll sort of measure that and just try and get it essentially the same length as the bottom piece. And I'll tie that in directly on top. I do want sort of more of a narrow vertical profile on this, and I'll trim off the excess. So the only variation here that I'm doing on this fly compared to sort of an OG Kreelex minnow is I'm going to throw an ostrich loop in. You could throw just the ostrich itself into a loop, or you could add, just for some bulk in the head profile, you could add a little bit of ice dub in the base there just to bind the fibers and hold it. So I'm going to go ahead and create a loop, and I'm about 1 bead chain back. I'm going to wrap this forward just to the front of the eye, and then I'm going to attach my second section of, or my second installation of Kreelex. So again, I've got a loop. I'll come up in front of the eye and set my loop tool here, and I'll go over to my workstation then and prepare the ostrich into a clip that I'll then set in here. Important with dealing with this kind of loose materials to wax your thread. So I'm just going to prepare this on my bench, slightly overhanging so that I can grab it in a material clip. And then I'll take you know, a length of ostrich hurl. I like using ostrich. It creates a really nice swim, adds a little bit because this is swung and you're dependent on the flow of the current, the turbulence of the water. So a regular Kreelex generally isn't going to have a ton of movement. The ostrich in here in this step just helps to create some swim without actually swimming the fly. Okay, so I've got my sections of ostrich. I'm going to lay that down in the loop on top of the ice dub and essentially just create a relatively simple loop. Once I've got that relatively evenly spaced, I'll throw it into a material clip. Just like this, so you can see I've got the, looks a bit messy here, but I've got the dubbing and the ostrich, quite sparse. I'm going to pass it through the loop. And grab it there. So you have an opportunity here to sort of play around with the length. You can also come in with scissors and trim the butt sections of the ostrich. It's not going to make any difference, but if you wanted it just to stay nice and neat and thin, you can do that. So here I have my loop. I'm going to then take that and give it a spin until I feel or sense the materials kind of grab in there and they're not going to come apart. And then I'll take a bodkin and just make sure I've got everything teased out there before I give it an additional spin. Once I'm satisfied there, got everything out, I'll give it another spin, make sure everything's locked in. And this is another one of the advantages of working with loops, is that you can take even natural materials and take them off the stem or whatever, and you can play with the length. So you're not limited out by the type of material you're using and the length of it. Once that loop is complete, I'm going to grab it, trim that loop, and I'm going to just take the time to pull all of the ostrich back. I do want it to lay back as I wrap forward. And the front station of Kreelex is going to cover this up nicely. So I'm just going to wrap this forward. In this case, I'm using a silver and sort of mottled copper. So I've got a dun, or like a slate gray ostrich hurl, and I'm just bringing that forward. I'll bring it underneath the eyes, keeping the ostrich folded back on itself as I wrap. After the loop is essentially complete, I'll tie that off and secure it. Trim that off, and we can see here that we now have some uniform ostrich hurl that's just extending beyond the back section of Kreelex. You can take this chance too if you need to. If you ended up with sections that were too long. If you see any butt sections of the ostrich sticking out, you can clip those off. You can also, if you do need to nip the tips, if there's any really longer pieces of ostrich, you can kind of just nip those off. So essentially, this fly is almost complete. I'm just going to repeat the steps with the Kreelex, starting on the bottom. And you just want to make sure here, so your front section of Kreelex, there's a definite cut so that your profile, you can see here that I've got another very flat cut, but it doesn't extend all the way back. You want it relatively short, basically to the back of your shank, so that you're getting that very defined front section profile. So again, I'll take a section of the silver, and I will then cut it in half on itself and stack it together. And I'll make sure that the tips are all flush cut very straight. I do think that this is one of the key components of this fly. So I've got a very even cut there. I'm then going to measure this back so that we're only basically extending, you know, halfway down or to right about the end of the shank of the fly, and that's going to create sort of the head. And I'm going to keep that over the bottom. Wrap back, and right now we're sitting just sort of behind the bead chain. At this point, take some time. If you would like to add more just to give it more of a head profile, you can take the remaining sections and you could tie those in. In this case, I probably will, because I do want to maintain a bit more of a heavy front section. So you're using a little bit more material, even though it's shorter, on the head of the fly. Again, making sure it's even cut and lining up with your first tie-in. I will add that. And trim that off. And repeat the steps on the top. So again, I'm using the mottled gold copper on the top. Trim that off even. Cut in half. And I'm just going to make sure when I tie this section in that I'm matching the bottom. Laying that in on top. And we'll trim that off. If you've got a long enough piece left and you're going to tie a few of these, keep it, and you can easily use the remaining piece for the front section of your next fly. And then we'll just build up a bit of a taper on the head to finish the fly. Again, the Kreelex does have a rather large nose, similar to like a bucktail fly. So that looks good to me. I'll hit it with some glue. We'll finish that off, and then we can just singe the ends of the materials off there to clean it up. Usually we'll hit this with some glue just because of the size of the head. Generous amount so it doesn't come unbuttoned before I whip finish that off. Okay, if we want to just make sure, we can hit that with some more glue or some Sally Hansen's or whatever you're comfortable with. You could also hit it with some UV resin as needed. And I'll just take a lighter and just clean the head up there. And that's the Kreelex Minnow Swung version. Got some ostrich. Once we take it out of the vise, we can see that we do have that very defined vertical look to it. It does shrink down in the water quite nice, and it fishes really well. Thanks a lot. Hope you like it.